The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes small sounds feel louder than they should. A dog barked somewhere. A car door slammed in the distance. Evening sunlight spilled across the neat suburban houses. Steven Seagal stood near the sidewalk, adjusting his car keys in his hand, calm and unbothered. That calm didn't last long. "Hey!" The shout exploded through the street. Steven slowly turned. A man stormed toward him from the neighboring house, tall, aggressive, face red with rage. His jaw was tight, fists clenched like he'd been waiting all day for this moment. "You think you can just move in here and disrespect me?" The man barked. Steven said nothing at first. His face showed no anger, no fear, just patience. "I didn't disrespect anyone," he replied calmly. "If something's wrong, we can talk." That answer only made things worse. "Oh, we're past talking," the neighbor snapped. "People like you only understand force." A few doors opened. Curtains moved. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Steven took a step back, palms relaxed at his sides. "I don't want any trouble," he said evenly. The neighbor laughed loud, sharp, mocking. "Trouble? You're standing on my side of the line. I warned you people about crossing me." Steven glanced down, then back up. "I'll fix it. It's not an issue." That should have ended it. But the neighbor stepped closer, too close. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking," he growled, poking Steven's chest with one finger. The air changed. Steven didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't touch him. The neighbor mistook that silence for weakness. "You think you're tough because you're quiet?" he sneered. "I've dealt with guys like you before." People gathered now, neighbors standing on porches, frozen, unsure whether to intervene or record. Steven took a slow breath. "Let's calm down," he said. That was the breaking point. The neighbor pulled his arm back, muscles tight, rage pouring out of his eyes. "I'll teach you some respect," he spat. His fist shot forward fast, reckless, full of anger. And in that exact moment, before the punch could land, before anyone could scream, the neighbor realized something was horribly wrong. Because the man standing in front of him hadn't moved in fear. He had moved in control, and the mistake he had just made would change everything. The punch hadn't landed. It hung in the air for a split second, suspended between anger and consequence. That tiny pause was enough to make people gasp. Steven Seagal had already shifted his weight, not in panic, not in a rush, but with the kind of calm precision that comes from decades of discipline. The neighbor didn't notice it yet. All he knew was that something felt wrong. But to understand how that moment came to be, you have to rewind a little. Steven hadn't moved into the neighborhood long ago. Just a few weeks, maybe. No moving trucks, no loud introductions, no parties. One day, his house was empty. The next, the lights were on. Simple. Quiet. People noticed him. Of course, he kept to himself. Early morning walks, a nod to anyone who made eye contact. Jeans, old jackets, boots worn from use rather than fashion. No flashy cars, no visitors drawing attention. To most, he was just the quiet new guy. But to Mark, the neighbor who now stood mid-swing, Steven represented something else. Mark had lived on that street for years, long enough to believe he owned more than his property lines, long enough to believe the rules bent for him. Every neighborhood has someone like Mark. He watched from his window, measured lawns with his eyes, counted how many inches other people crossed lines that only existed in his head. He liked control, not because he needed it, but because it made him feel important. The first time he noticed Steven was 3 days earlier. Steven had parked slightly closer to the curb than usual while unloading groceries. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. But to Mark, it was an invitation. He stepped outside that day too. "You can't park like that," Mark had said sharply. Steven looked up from the trunk. "I'll move it in a minute." Mark scoffed. "It's always a minute with you people." Steven paused, then met his eyes. "I said I'll move it." And he did. That should have ended it. But Mark felt something else instead of relief, dissatisfaction. Steven hadn't reacted the way Mark wanted. No arguing, no anger, no fear. That silence bothered him. Over the next few days, Mark watched more closely. How Steven moved, how he carried himself. There was something solid about him, like a man who didn't need to announce himself. That made Mark uneasy. So, when he saw Steven near the sidewalk that evening adjusting his car keys, standing close to the invisible line Mark guarded so fiercely he snapped. Now, back in the present, Mark's punch was halfway through the air. People were watching, neighbors frozen, unsure whether this was just shouting or something worse. Steven's expression didn't change. Inside, he felt no surge of panic, no spike of anger, just awareness, distance, balance. He had spent years training his body to react before his mind needed to speak. Years understanding that violence wasn't about strength, it was about timing. But Steven wasn't here to prove anything. He simply didn't intend to get hit. Mark's eyes were filled with fury. But buried deep beneath it was something else: insecurity. The kind that lashes out when it feels ignored. "Hit him," someone yelled impulsively, more fear than encouragement. Another voice answered, "Hey, stop!" But the punch kept coming. Steven shifted his stance slightly, barely noticeable. His shoulders relaxed even more. To Mark, it still looked like weakness. To anyone who had ever trained, it looked like control. The street felt smaller now, like the air itself was holding its breath. No one knew who Steven really was. Not yet. No one knew that the calm man standing there had spent decades learning how to end fights without throwing a punch. And Mark, blinded by ego, fueled by anger, had no idea that the lesson he was about to receive wouldn't come from violence, but from embarrassment, from reality, from realizing, just seconds too late, that he had chosen the wrong man to intimidate. Because the quiet ones aren't quiet because they're afraid. They're quiet because they don't need to be loud. And the punch that was meant to humiliate was about to expose everything. The punch never landed. In one smooth motion so subtle that half the people watching missed it, Steven stepped just outside the line of the strike. Not back, not away, just enough. Mark's fist cut through empty air. The sudden loss of resistance threw him off balance. His foot slipped forward, his body tilting awkwardly as confusion replaced confidence in his eyes. Before Mark could recover, Steven's hand was already there. Not striking, not hurting, just controlling. His fingers wrapped around Mark's wrist, firm but measured. No twist yet, no pain, just a quiet stop. "What?" Mark gasped. Steven leaned in slightly, his voice calm, almost tired. "Don't do this." For a split second, everything froze. Mark stood there, bent forward, his arm held in place by a grip that felt wrong. Not weak, not aggressive, just immovable. He tried to pull back. Nothing. "What the hell is this?" Mark snapped, panic creeping into his tone. "Let go of me." Steven didn't tighten his grip, didn't raise his voice. "Relax," he said. "You're going to hurt yourself." That sentence struck harder than any insult. Mark yanked again, harder this time. That was the mistake. With a small turn of the wrist, precise, economical, Steven shifted the angle just enough. Pain shot up Mark's arm like fire. Not sharp enough to injure, but strong enough to demand attention. Mark let out a shout. "Ah, stop!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Did you see that? He didn't even hit him. How did he do that?" Steven stepped slightly to the side, guiding Mark forward so he wouldn't fall. "I said calm down," Steven repeated. Mark's face went from red to pale. Sweat formed instantly at his hairline. "You're hurting me," he yelled, voice cracking now. "Let go." Steven finally released his wrist. Mark stumbled backward, grabbing his arm like it had betrayed him. He stared at Steven, eyes wide, breathing heavy. What are you?" he muttered. Steven straightened his jacket. "Someone who doesn't want problems," he said. The street erupted into whispers. That didn't look normal. He moved like he's trained or something. Who is that guy? Mark felt them now, the eyes, the judgment, the shift in energy. He wasn't the intimidating figure anymore. He was the one exposed. "You think that was smart?" Mark barked, trying desperately to regain control. "You put your hands on me. You swung first," Steven replied evenly. "I don't care," Mark shouted. "You embarrassed me." The words slipped out before Mark could stop them. The truth. Silence followed. Steven looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, not with pride, just understanding. "This isn't about parking," Steven said quietly. "Is it?" Mark clenched his jaw. His pride screamed at him to attack again, to prove something, to get back control. But his body remembered the pain. He glanced around. Phones were out now. Someone was recording. Mark took a step back. "I'm not done with you," he said, though the threat sounded hollow. Steven nodded once. "That's your choice." The tension lingered like a storm cloud. Then a new voice cut through the noise. Wait a minute. An older man, a neighbor who'd lived on the street longer than anyone, stepped closer. He squinted at Steven's face, tilting his head slightly. I've seen you before, the man said slowly. Steven met his eyes but said nothing. The older man snapped his fingers, realization spreading across his face. You look just like that actor? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Actor? What actor? The man hesitated, uncertain. No, not just an actor. A martial artist. From those movies. Mark laughed nervously. Yeah, right. You think I'd pick a fight with some movie star? But the laugh didn't convince anyone, not even himself. Steven exhaled softly. It doesn't matter who I am, he said. This didn't need to happen. But the seed had already been planted. People looked closer now. At the posture, the eyes, the calm. Mark followed their gaze and felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you talking about? He said quieter. Who are you? Steven didn't answer. He turned, calmly picked up his keys from where they'd fallen, and took a step back toward his house. That quiet movement did more damage than any punch, because for the first time since he stormed across the street, Mark felt uncertain, not angry, not powerful, just unsure. And that uncertainty was about to turn into something much worse. Steven had turned his back. That simple action, walking away, confused everyone more than the confrontation itself. Most people expected shouting, threats, police sirens, something loud. Instead, there was just quiet. Mark stood in the middle of the street, rubbing his wrist, his chest rising and falling fast. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out broken. Yeah, he muttered loudly, forcing confidence. That's what I thought. No one responded. The neighbors weren't looking at him anymore. Their attention followed Steven the way he walked, unbothered, controlled, like nothing unusual had happened. Phones stayed raised. Someone whispered, "Why is he so calm?" Steven reached the edge of his driveway and paused. Not because he was scared. Not because he was running. Because he felt the weight of eyes on him. Behind him, Mark felt it too, the shift in power. Only minutes earlier, Mark had stormed across the street convinced he owned the moment. Now he felt exposed, smaller, and he hated that feeling. "Hey," Mark called out, louder than necessary. "You don't just grab someone and walk away." Steven didn't turn around. "I didn't grab you," he replied calmly. "I stopped you." The words were simple, but they landed heavy. A woman from across the street stepped closer to her husband. That man was out of line, she said quietly, but not quietly enough. Another neighbor nodded. He went at him first. Mark heard them. His ears burned. "I was protecting my property," he snapped, spinning around. "He crossed the line." "There isn't even a line there," someone said. A few nervous chuckles escaped the crowd. Mark's face tightened. Control was slipping. He needed to regain it fast. So he did the one thing insecure people do when they feel cornered. He lied. "He attacked me," Mark said loudly, pointing at Steven. "I just defended myself." A few people frowned. "That's not what we saw," the older man said. Mark ignored him. "I'm calling the police," Mark threatened, pulling his phone from his pocket. Steven turned then, slowly, calmly. "I think that's a good idea," Steven said. The confidence in that sentence hit the crowd like a ripple. Mark hesitated. You think I'm scared?" Mark barked. Though his voice betrayed him, Steven didn't answer. He simply leaned against his car, arms relaxed. That scared Mark more. The older neighbor stepped forward again, squinting harder at Steven's face like a puzzle finally coming together. "I know you," he said. "I'm sure of it." Steven met his gaze, respectful but firm. "From where?" Steven asked. The man thought. Then his eyes widened. "My son watches those movies," he said slowly. "Action films, martial arts." A few people exchanged glances. "Yeah," someone added. "He does look familiar." Mark laughed again, sharper this time. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You people think every calm guy is some kind of assassin." No one laughed with him. Steven straightened, adjusting his jacket slightly, the same jacket he'd worn all week, the same simple clothes. "That isn't the point," Steven said. "This could have ended without anyone getting hurt." Mark shook his head, gripping his phone too tightly. "You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself," Steven replied quietly. The street went dead silent. That was the moment. No shouting, no punch, just truth. Mark swallowed hard. The older neighbor's voice broke the silence again, softer this time. "Your posture," he said to Steven. "The way you moved. I used to train years ago. Only people with serious discipline stand like that." Someone else whispered it now. "Wait, Steven Seagal?" The name floated through the air like a spark. A woman gasped. "No way." Another person stepped closer. Phone zooming in. Mark felt his stomach drop. "What?" he snapped. "That's not funny." Steven didn't correct them. He didn't confirm it either. And somehow, that made it worse. People whispered faster now. "Google him. Look at his face. That can't be a coincidence." Mark's phone vibrated in his hand, not from dialing, but from nerves. The crowd's mood shifted again. This time, not against Steven, against Mark, because arrogance looks ugly when everyone can see it. Steven pushed himself off the car. "Let's all take a breath," he said calmly. "This ends now." But Mark could barely hear him. His world had narrowed to one terrifying question. What if it's true? And as he looked at the man he had just tried to punch, the calm, unmoved, completely unafraid man, Mark realized something chilling. If that really was Steven Seagal, then he hadn't just embarrassed himself. He had picked the worst possible person to challenge, and the truth, the full truth, was about to come out. The whisper wouldn't die. It moved from porch to porch, phone to phone, low at first, then louder. "Steven Seagal?" Mark shook his head, trying to push the thought away. "That's stupid," he snapped. "You think a Hollywood guy is living here? Next to us?" But his voice cracked, because something inside him already knew the truth wasn't stupid at all. Steven stood there quietly as the name echoed around him. He didn't react, didn't smile, didn't deny it. He simply watched the crowd, the way their expressions shifted from curiosity to realization. A woman near the sidewalk unlocked her phone, fingers shaking as she typed. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What?" someone asked. She turned her screen toward them. "It's him. Look." Faces leaned closer. Gasps followed. "That's him. The nose, the eyes. He's older. But yeah." Mark stepped forward, heart pounding. "Let me see that." The woman hesitated, then held the phone out. Mark looked, and the ground seemed to drop out from under him. There it was. A younger version, confident, powerful, unmistakable. Martial arts poses, movie stills, interviews. Steven Seagal. Mark's mouth went dry. "That's not," he muttered. "That doesn't mean anything." But the street had already changed. Respect replaced tension. Excitement replaced fear. "Why didn't you say anything?" someone asked Steven. Steven answered calmly. "Because it didn't matter." That response made the moment heavier. The older neighbor stepped forward again, shaking his head slowly. "I knew it," he said. "I trained in Aikido years ago. The stance, the control. You don't forget that." Mark laughed weakly now, a sound filled with desperation. "So what?" he said. "He's some actor." "That doesn't mean," Steven interrupted him gently. "This isn't about fame," he said. "This is about how you treat people." Silence swallowed the street. Mark's anger collapsed into panic. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "If I'd known." Steven's gaze locked onto him. "That's exactly the point," Steven said. The words hit like a verdict. "You were ready to hurt someone you thought was weaker." Steven continued. "Not because they deserved it, but because you felt disrespected." Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. Someone else spoke instead. "He tried to punch him," a neighbor said quietly. "In front of everyone." Phones were still recording. Mark became aware of them all at once. The lenses, the witnesses, the proof. "I lost my temper," he said, voice shaking. "Everyone does." I said, "I'm sorry." Steven studied him for a moment. "I believe you're sorry now," he said. "But that doesn't erase the choice you made." Mark's knees felt weak. "I'm not a bad guy," he said, almost begging. Steven nodded slowly. "I didn't say you were." Relief flickered in Mark's chest, brief and fragile. "But you let anger decide who you were today," Steven added. That relief shattered. No insults, no threats, no raised voice, just truth. The crowd shifted again, not cheering, not mocking, but watching. Steven reached down and picked up his keys. "I came here for peace," he said. "Same as anyone else." He looked around the street, meeting each neighbor's eyes. "But peace requires respect," he continued. "Not just when you think someone matters." Mark swallowed. "I don't want trouble," Steven said. "I never did." A police siren sounded faintly in the distance. Someone had called earlier. It grew closer, then slowed. Steven heard it and sighed softly. The patrol car pulled up at the end of the street. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the crowd. "What's going on here?" one asked. Before Mark could speak, the older neighbor stepped forward. "It's handled," he said. "We all saw what happened." The officer glanced at Steven, then did a double take. "Sir," he said carefully. Steven nodded once. The officer's posture changed instantly. "Yes, sir." That was the final blow. Mark watched the interaction, his shoulders sagging. The officer spoke quietly with a few witnesses, then nodded. "No charges?" one asked Steven. Steven shook his head. "No," he said. "Let it end here." The officers left shortly after. No handcuffs, no headlines, no escalation, just consequences. Mark stood there, defeated not because he'd lost a fight, but because he'd been seen. And as Steven turned back toward his house, the lesson settled into everyone watching. Real power doesn't humiliate. It doesn't chase revenge. It simply stands and lets the truth do the work. The crowd didn't disappear right away. People lingered on their porches, whispering softly, replaying what they had just witnessed. Some lowered their phones, others stood frozen, like they were afraid the lesson might vanish if they moved too fast. Steven Seagal unlocked his car, then paused. He looked back at the street, not at Mark alone, but at everyone. "This neighborhood," Steven said evenly, "should feel safe for all of you." No one interrupted. No arguments, he continued. No egos, no lines drawn with anger. Mark stood a few steps away now, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the pavement. The anger that once fueled him had completely burned out, leaving only shame in its place. "I don't cause trouble," Mark said suddenly, his voice low. "People just push me." Steven turned toward him. "That's something you tell yourself," Steven said, not harshly. "But nobody pushed you today." The words stung because they were true. Mark swallowed hard. "I lost control," he admitted. "I don't want to be that guy." Steven studied him carefully. "Then don't be," he said. There was no lecture, no dramatic punishment, just responsibility placed gently and firmly back where it belonged. The older neighbor stepped closer, resting his hands in his pockets. "This doesn't have to define you," he said to Mark. "But you owe him an apology. A real one." Mark nodded. He took a slow step forward. "I'm sorry," Mark said, finally meeting Steven's eyes. "Not because of who you are, because of what I did." Steven nodded once. "That matters," he said. The tension on the street eased. Shoulders relaxed. Breaths came easier. A few neighbors quietly drifted back toward their homes. Kids resumed playing down the block. Normal life returned, but different. Steven closed his car door. "For what it's worth," he said to Mark, "it takes strength to admit fault." Mark gave a weak nod, still processing. Steven then turned to the crowd. "We all carry something," he said. "Stress, pride, fear. But none of that gives us permission to hurt others." No one argued. Steven walked toward his front door, keys in hand. Halfway there, he stopped again. "One more thing," he said. Everyone looked up. "This ends here," Steven said calmly. "No gossip. No videos posted to mock anyone. Let him learn without being destroyed." A few people exchanged looks, then nodded. Mark's eyes filled briefly. "Thank you," he said quietly. Steven acknowledged him with a slight nod and continued inside. The door closed gently. No slam, no victory pose, just closure. The street slowly emptied. Mark remained where he was for a long moment, staring at the ground where it had all started. The invisible line he had defended so fiercely felt meaningless now. He walked back to his house slower than before. Inside, he sat down, rubbing his wrist again, not from pain but from memory. Across the street, lights turned on one by one. Life moved on, but something had shifted. That night, Mark barely slept. The scene replayed again and again, the calm voice, the effortless control. The moment everyone saw him for who he had been. The next morning, Steven stepped outside again. Same clothes, same calm, same quiet presence. Mark watched from his window, then stepped outside. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He raised a hand awkwardly. "Morning," he said. Steven nodded back. Morning. No tension. No fear. Just two neighbors now equal. Because the real resolution hadn't been about strength or fame. It had been about restraint. about choosing not to crush someone when you easily could. And that choice, more than any fight, was what truly ended the conflict. The street looked the same the next day. Same houses, same driveways, same quiet hum of ordinary life. But the people weren't the same. Every neighbor who had witnessed the moment carried it with them, not as gossip, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of how fast pride can turn into regret, a reminder of how quiet strength can overpower loud aggression without ever needing to strike. Steven Seagal never spoke about what happened. He didn't tell stories. He didn't give interviews. He didn't act like the moment mattered more than it should, because to him, it didn't. It was just another example of something he'd learned long ago. That real power doesn't look like domination. It looks like control. Mark learned something too, something that would follow him longer than embarrassment. He learned that respect isn't earned by intimidation. It's earned by restraint, by listening, by knowing when to step back instead of swinging forward. For days after, Mark found himself noticing small things differently. The way people reacted to tone, the way silence could speak louder than shouting. He stopped policing invisible lines, stopped assuming the worst, because he understood now how fragile ego really was and how dangerous it could become when fed unchecked. And Steven? He went back to being the quiet neighbor. Morning walks, a nod, a polite greeting. No one challenged him after that. Not because they feared him, but because they respected him. And that's the lesson most people miss. Fear creates compliance. Respect creates peace. You never know who you're standing in front of. The calm man you try to intimidate. The quiet woman you dismiss. The stranger you underestimate. They might carry discipline you can't see, experience you can't measure, strength they don't need to announce. The world isn't divided into powerful and powerless. It's divided into those who control themselves and those who don't. And the ones who don't often expose themselves without ever realizing it. So the next time anger rises in your chest, pause. Ask yourself who you're really trying to prove something to. Because violence doesn't make you strong. Shouting doesn't make you right. And humiliation doesn't make you important. True strength is the ability to walk away with dignity even when your ego begs you to stay and fight. True power is choosing restraint when you could easily choose force. That day, no one won a fight. But everyone learned something. Respect isn't about titles. It isn't about fame. It isn't about size or strength. It's about how you treat others, especially when you believe you have the upper hand. Because one moment of arrogance can follow you longer than a lifetime of silence. And one act of restraint can change more than any punch ever could. If you believe respect is real strength, type respect in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to thank every person who chooses calm over chaos.